The long pass to Panderbury. In the clear, right in. Yeah, he scores!
Nelson into the zone. Deeds scores! They've tied the game. Henrik on the left wing. Centers. Daniel shoots. Scores! The best shift of the season.
Here's Elias comes in and shoots. Scores! His first goal of the NHL.
Welcome back to Towel Power. Shaheed Devji here, sitting alongside Zam Kareem for a very special episode of Towel Power. We're on video again after a long time being audio only, but it is, like I said, a special episode because we've got a very special guest on this episode. It's Harman Dayal of The Athletic. He's going to join us to talk about the Canucks at basically the halfway point of their season. They played 40 games, and it's a good time to check in with one of the pros. And as you'll hear, we've already talked to him, but as you'll hear, he is certainly a pro, and you'll find out why in our conversation. But we're also going to talk to him about his journey and how he got to where he is today. And it's quite an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it really got to give the young man a ton of young man.
You sound quite old when you say that, but he's 19. You're 33. Yeah, so you're 34 almost. You're almost 15 years older than the guy.
Oh man, good for him. He found a lane in the Vancouver media market, which can be sometimes hard to find, and he carved out his space. And like I said, hard to do in this market, and great on him for finding that. I've been trying to find that for the last 5 years.
I kind of stopped trying to find it, but like he's living the dream for sure. A lot of us have wanted to do what he is doing, and like you said, very few can actually get to that point where they can say that they are living their dream, and he certainly is. And we'll get to him, but this is our first show after the holidays. It's December 30th, last show of the decade. How are your holidays? How was your Christmas?
Christmas was good. Girlfriend and I, we went skiing up to Mount Seymour.
I took the kids sledding, which was fun.
Yeah, it was beautiful days to go skiing and sledding, and it was great to wake up, go find the coldest part of Vancouver, which was Mount Seymour on that day, spend the day in the sun, and then go eat some turkey. It was a great day, but I got sick after that.
No. I feel myself getting sick now, and it's really unfortunate because I go back to work in a couple of days, and I just had got over a sickness, and now I'm starting to feel it again, which is unfortunate. But it's that time of year, and especially with little kids. Well, not getting a lot of sleep either at this time of year, right? Kind of late nights.
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking forward to finally having a couple days off. Gonna take it easy tomorrow being New Year's Eve, and New Year's Day gonna take it easy, and before I go back to work on the 2nd as well, and just kind of catch up on some sleep. Yeah, exactly. As you say, I've been lacking sleep probably for the last 2 weeks.
So it's funny how things have changed, and we've talked about it over our last couple of episodes, how the sky was falling in one episode, then suddenly there's a win streak, and things are looking quite peachy. The Canucks now in the top 3 of the Pacific Division in a playoff spot, and it feels comfortably because they're on a 5-game win streak, and who knows how far this can go, because going into the game against Calgary, I wasn't so confident, especially with what you hear about Calgary and them kind of having turned the corner a little bit, around that Bill Peters time, Jeff Ward time, and how the Canucks were going to fare against what is supposed to be one of the heavyweights of the Pacific Division, but it wasn't really even close.
No, the Canucks just dominated the game from the get-go. They didn't outshoot Calgary by a large amount, but at the same time, great goaltending from Thatcher Demko again, but like opportune goals, getting goals at opportune times. And yesterday it was Tanner Pearson, and what a goal from Tanner Pearson in that game.
Yeah, I mean, the goaltending didn't look great for Calgary throughout the night. No. And on that one, it didn't look particularly good in my mind. Goalie was going the wrong direction, but I mean, he's got a shot and he can put it where it needs to go. Tyler Mott, speaking of shots, that his goal, not last game, but the game before was quite nice. I don't think he scored yesterday because he was on a two-game goal streak and didn't score yesterday, But
Tyler Myers also had a really good game with 2 goals, one on the power play. That when he gets those opportunities, he's able to get that nice shot off from the point. it was a good shot, and the second goal was lucky.
Yeah, for sure.
But
one of his better games for sure.
Yeah.
In spite or regardless of the two goals, it was one of his better games defensively, moving the puck, and obviously offensively with putting the puck in the net. That was a good game from Tyler Myers, and certainly if he can put up some more of those, that would be welcome from the Canucks. And were they both power play goals? No, one of them was a power play goal, and
he did get an assist on Jake Virtanen's goal,
another power play goal, and that's 2 second unit goals, right? Which is interesting. And the Canucks power play still rolling, but it's been over the last couple of weeks, it's been mainly the second unit, which is interesting. And speaking of Jake Virtanen, how good has Jake Virtanen been over the last month or month and a half? He has been so consistent, and every game it seems like he's getting better, which to me it's so refreshing and welcoming, because we've been wanting this for so long, and he finally seems to. We talked about this a couple shows ago, but he finally seems to be comfortable what he's doing, and he kind of knows what he's doing. And when he makes a mistake, he knows what he did and how to fix it.
For sure, and he's playing a really good two-way game, and he's throwing his body around. He's finally getting the opportunity. The coaches, among them Travis Green, obviously, are starting to feel confident in playing him in higher risk situations and in higher pressure situations, and he's showing that he's worthy of those extra minutes. And take a look at his shooting percentage, 15.4% shooting percentage.
Which is fairly high.
It is. Only Elias Pettersson and Adam Gaudette have a higher shooting percentage. And Tyler Mott, pretty much the same as Gaudette, have a higher shooting percentage on the team. And
with Gaudette and Mott, you expect that maybe to come down a little bit. With Pettersson, probably not, because he's just that kind of player. But Virtanen, he's got a good shot, and when he finds himself in those positions, you kind of got to think now that he's going to bury them more often than not, or 15% of the time. So,
and he's a shooter, so he's going to shoot first. He's got 12 goals, 11 assists. Expect those goals to go up. Maybe those assists to go up slowly as well.
Well, and it's funny you say he's playing a good two-way game, and the eye test may suggest that, but we're not necessarily sure, because you and I are not necessarily analytics guys.
We're not analytics people, as we're going to hear about when we talk to Harman.
Exactly. So why don't we use that as a springboard to welcoming our guest this week? Harman Dayal is one of the newest members on the Vancouver sports media scene, but despite his recent appearance on the scene, he has quickly become a staple when it comes to Canucks coverage. He began last season as a writer for Canucks Army, but before it was over, he was a regular contributor on The Athletic. Known as Boy Genius for his interesting takes based heavily on advanced stats, he was mentored by the likes of Jason Botchford and is now a must-read, listen, and watch reporter when it comes to anything Canucks. And he joins us now. Harman, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Always happy to come on podcasts, and thank you for the extremely kind words there on the intro.
So I'm going to give you the opportunity right now, and you're welcome, but to correct anything in the intro. Is that okay, or you want to correct anything?
No, it's perfect. I couldn't have written a better one myself, to be honest with you.
Okay, good. I should have probably consulted you before we started, but I figured let's do it live, as they say, and we'll see where it goes. Okay, so first thing I wanted to know about you, as we talk a little bit about your journey, because it's such an interesting one. What are you, 19 yet, or are you still 18?
I'm 19.
Okay, so you're 19. Would you consider yourself a Canucks fan? And I guess prior to getting into what you're doing now, were you a Canucks fan or a hockey fan in general? What would you categorize yourself as?
I was definitely a Canucks fan, sort of as a kid growing up, especially following along with the 2011 team, and I think that was the team, and especially even just around the league, I became really infatuated with hockey from a really young age. I found it interesting to just keep tabs with not only what was going on with the Canucks, but just around the league. And I think I always found myself in a position where at some point I wanted to even when I was a really young teenager, put my voice out there, and sort of I had opinions and takes, and I wanted a platform to be able to share them, because I thought sometimes you just wanna get some opinions off your chest, and that's sort of how I integrated myself initially, and then now, of course, as you get into the media space, you have to be objective in covering the team, and so I think over the last 2 or 3 years, I'd say the fandom isn't there anymore, but obviously, given the fact that I'm covering a team and I'm serving an audience of Canucks fans. I've got friends and family that are Canucks fans. Obviously, I want to see the organization do well, but definitely, I think once you step into the media side of things, just to be able to do your job to the best of your ability, I think from my perspective, I've had to put that aside a little bit.
And Harman, did you grow up playing the game as well?
I did not. So I played a lot of soccer growing up. And then, yeah, it was just one of those things where I think for starters, I was never a morning person.
Yeah, we both remember the 5 a.m. practices or 6 a.m. games and that lifestyle.
Yeah, so it was one of those things where definitely took skating lessons as a kid growing up. I played a lot of ball hockey. So I was involved playing in that sense, but never ice hockey specifically.
So you said you were a fan during that Stanley Cup run, and there's probably no better time to be a fan of the Canucks than during that time. And I'll let the cat out of the bag here. Both of us are in our 30s, 33, and Zam's
Yeah.
almost 34. And so, we've gone through some tough times as Canucks fans, but that for sure for me is certainly the highlight of my Canucks fan. And what's your best memory, as a Canucks fan before we get into some of the stuff you've been doing recently as a reporter and on the more biased side?
I think definitely the Alex Burrows Game 7 winner. I think honestly that whole 2011 run was pretty insane to follow along with. I think the three highlights would definitely be, of course, Burrows slaying the Dragon there in the first round against Chicago. Game 2 of the Cup Finals was when Burrows scored that OT winner. That was a huge rush of emotions, and when Lapierre scored in Game 5 to sort of get that victory, that was another big highlight. And then after that, I'm not really sure. I think they just canceled the rest of the series after Game 5.
Yeah, I think we can all forget about that. So, how did you get here then? Like, how did you end up doing what you're doing now? And I talked a little bit about it in the intro there, and you're writing for Canucks Army and then The Athletic. But was there a spark somewhere? Was this always the dream for you? You said you wanted to have your own voice, but are you living your dream now, or did it sort of evolve as things kind of took off over the last couple of years?
It was definitely my dream. I think what happened was in grade 12, we had a course called Independent Directed Studies. And so for that, we had to choose a topic that we were passionate about and do a year-long project on it. And so for me, I chose writing about the Canucks. And so I just started blogging in my senior year of high school. And at that point, once I got the ball rolling and started writing once a week, I realized I really love this. And I didn't know that when I had initially planned out to start writing. I knew I loved the game of hockey. But once I actually got going, then I was like, this would absolutely be a dream come true. And so that's sort of what drove the passion. And that's what allowed me to sort of keep following that path even as I continued along with school.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, we, Zam and I are failed reporters and anchors and sports journalists. So you're certainly living our dream.
You say that now.
I do say that now. Yeah. So, good on you for making it happen. Zam asked a little bit about whether you played the game or whether you're a fan. There's, certainly when you're a fan, you can pick up a lot about the game. Do you find that it's your primary sport, or would you still call soccer your primary sport because you played it? Like, are you still learning things about the game? I'm sure you are.
I'd say definitely hockey is the primary game. I think I never really watched soccer despite playing it a lot. And the interesting thing is a lot of what I learned systems-wise in hockey was because there were so many similarities in soccer. So for instance, moving the ball out of the back in soccer is pretty similar to breaking the puck out of your own zone in hockey. Things like pressing in soccer are similar to forechecking. And then just overall common themes, like for instance, stretching the playing surface vertically and horizontally, keeping a tight gap in the neutral playing zone, whether that's the neutral zone in hockey or the midfield in soccer. Simple things like I remember one of the first pieces I did for The Athletic was dissecting sort of the breakouts, and I noticed that the wingers weren't dropping deep enough for the defensemen to be able to make outlet passes. And the only reason I knew that was because I played soccer, and I knew that when we had issues moving the ball out of the back, a big issue that arose would be our wingbacks weren't dropping far back enough. And so when I watched the Canucks games, I was like, wow, this is incredible. This is the same things we're talking about in soccer. So I think there was a lot of overlap systemically, and then of course I had to fill in the gaps here and there a lot, especially with special teams on power play and penalty kills, sort of understanding the different systems that coaches implement in those setups and D zone coverage and the different ways to attack in the offensive zone. But a lot of what I learned in soccer gave me the foundation of my understanding for hockey.
And Harman, you were nicknamed Boy Genius, and you use a lot of advanced stats and analytics in your reporting. How did you learn about that, and how much value do you put in that as a value assessment? Like Shaheed and I are both a little bit older and probably go more on the eye test thing, and I don't understand analytics to a great extent. And how did you get into that, and how do you translate that to the everyday hockey fan?
I think for myself in analytics, it was just something where I don't know. When I started writing, I was just particularly drawn to. I wanted to have objective evidence to back up a lot of what I was seeing and the assertions that I was making, and so analytics was just one of the ways to do that. And so I ended up sort of through trial and error, figuring out what sort of works in player evaluation, what doesn't. I read a lot. I think that was the biggest thing. I had maybe a staple at the time of 10 to 15 writers that would they would just go deep into numbers, and so I'd pick up lessons here and there and sort of figure out, okay, I like this evaluation, and sort of morph my own way, which isn't like, it's not completely unique. I think it's more unique when you combine it with the eye test. But I think that's sort of how I got into it, was just learning how other people are trying to use this data, and then figuring out, okay, how might I want to combine that with what I'm seeing. And then I think as far as translating that to the average fan, I think the biggest thing is just trying to keep things, I think, simplifying it as much as possible. I think you even see it for analysts that work in NHL organizations. They tell you half the battle is being able to communicate the trends and patterns that you're seeing in data in a way that's clear and concise. So the value that I really see in analytics is it can tell you what's happening on the ice, right? Like when Elias Pettersson is on the ice, the Canucks generate a ton of shots and a ton of scoring chances. They outshoot their opponents, they out-attempt their opponents. That's obviously a really basic example, but that's an instance where the data is telling you what's happening on the ice. And so a lot of times what I look for in the eye test is, why is something happening? So, for instance, if you're talking about, let's say Eric Branson a couple of years ago, when the Canucks acquired him, a lot of people in the analytics community were up in arms initially. And I think that's one of those situations where in player assessment you want to combine the video and the analytics. And so the analytics would tell you, when Branson is on the ice, the Panthers allow a lot of goals, they allow a lot of scoring chances, they allow a lot of shots. They're essentially hemmed into their own zone. And so then at that point it's about using the video, and you can see, okay, well, he doesn't break the puck out well. And so that's sort of how I like to integrate it into my analysis, because I think the biggest thing with the eye test is it can sometimes deceive you. There are so many biases that are formed in the human brain, and I think using data is just one way to add objectivity to your analysis. Although, of course, the numbers aren't without its flaws either. For instance, there's sometimes it can miss context. So really, it's about finding that sweet spot in the middle. But I see value in the fact that it's objective evidence.
So the big question is, do the little things from Louis Eriksson show up in the analytics? That's the big question of the day.
I think so far this season, what you can say is that he isn't actively harming the team.
Well, he's not putting the puck in his own net.
Yeah,
so.
exactly.
Yeah. But in all seriousness, when he's been on the ice, the Canucks haven't really been hemmed into their own zone, and of course it's important to keep in mind that he has next to no value offensively. So I think at this point, what you're seeing out of him is that he's a fourth line caliber player who sort of he can fill a role on sort of like a camouflage line that kind of exists. And its role is more or less just to keep things close until your big guns can step out on the ice and be the difference makers. So I think that's what you see out of Eriksson, and of course those players are a dime a dozen.
Yeah, you're a true pro answering that question with actual insight as I tried to make a joke. But Louis Eriksson is an enigma for Canucks fans, and I'm sure you as you've demonstrated have looked into it, and sometimes he gets a hard time. And I was at the game against the Penguins a couple of games ago, and he gets booed. I don't think he was getting looed. I think he was getting booed in the starting lineup, and it just didn't sit well with me because it doesn't seem fair to him. Like, he's kind of not in control of his situation at this point, even though you might want to argue that. But with that being said, that's just that bias that you're talking about. People are just tired of it. They want it to end. And it is your job to kind of look at the numbers and what he's doing when he's on the ice, when he's in the lineup. But like I said, a bit tongue in cheek there. So we'll get to a bit more of the on ice stuff in a minute here. But I did want to ask you one more question about your journey here, and sort of a serious one, but one that I'm sure means a lot to you. And like we mentioned, last season was a breakout year for you. A lot of that development that you've had, you attributed to Jason Botchford, who guided you through that year, and you wrote so well about it in your piece on The Athletic after his passing. So first off, we're really sorry that you had to go through that. That must have been super hard for you. I mean, I can't imagine how it would have felt for you, because it was a big loss for us as fans, but it was impactful for us. And I'm wondering what the biggest impact Jason Botchford had on you was.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. It's one of those things where I think about it every day, and there's no way that I'm in this position right now if it isn't for Jason. And I think the biggest impact that he made was just as a mentor as a whole. I remember initially coming on, and sort of how I got to this position was in last September. I'd pitched sort of a one-off story on Jake Virtanen and his own entry playmaking and some of the numbers and video insights that I had on him. And it was just meant to be a one-off piece because the Athletic Vancouver was pretty well staffed. And they told me that right off the bat. That initial piece did well. And from there, they said, if you want to pitch an idea or two here and there, you can go for it and we'll decide. But there was nothing consistent, like, hey, you can write 1 or 2 articles a month type thing. But once I did those second and third articles, he absolutely went to bat for me internally. He ensured that I got my shot as a freelancer, and from there he did everything in his power to support me. I mean, the Athletes, the Patcast, TSN 1040, everywhere he went, he sung my praises, and that was instrumental. So many people saw my content just because he spread the message. And then beyond that, he was just such a huge resource. Like, we'd go back and forth all day, every day about the Canucks, and we'd bounce ideas off of each other. And it was just one of those relationships where he sort of guided me through how to approach things and how to try and advance and improve myself. And even my first experience at the rink reporting in person was a UBC practice where he took me out there, and that's one of those things where Botch didn't even go to UBC practices. He made a special trip out just for me, and showed me the ropes, helped get us an interview set up with Bo Horvat, and yeah, I mean, it's sort of hard to put into words. It's just from every step of the way, he was there as someone I could lean on and as a mentor to me.
Yeah, and not everybody knew Jason Botchford like you knew him, but many others knew him well, and they all speak the same way about the person that he was. And to me, that was the most surprising thing as a fan, because you don't see that other side of him. You don't see the inside, sort of the behind the scenes stuff. You see the fiery Jason Botchford who needs an army, but it was really, really touching to see how many stories like that came out. And, I'm glad for you that you got to experience that. And now that we get to sort of, I guess, to watch and read and listen to his legacy kind of living on through you, not to put any pressure on you, because I don't mean to do that when I say that. So one more thing on that for me is I've noticed this year that, and maybe it's not just this year, but it's become a bit more apparent to me, at least, that in your stories and in your takes, you're being maybe a bit bolder in what you're saying. And as a young guy, for me, I'm still kind of a little, apprehensive when I take a big stand. I'm putting a movie out in the world, a 10-minute short film about being a Muslim, and how tough that is in these days, and I'm a bit apprehensive about what the reaction is going to be. But there's nothing like Canucks Twitter, as you know, and some of the stories you're putting out, you're making big statements, you're backing them up. But how much have you had to learn to do that and trust your instincts and your research and your professionalism? Has that, or have you always been comfortable doing that?
No, it's definitely something you think about a lot, because you're putting. Everyone's going to make mistakes, but each sort of stand that you take, each take that you put out there, there's obviously a lot of, like, essentially part of your reputation is out on the line there. So for myself, absolutely. Sometimes when I take a big stand, I'm a little bit apprehensive, and I hope and try and trust my instincts and the research I've done. But no, it's definitely something that I think I've learned over time, and I think part of it is from trial and error through the last couple of years blogging, where I've seen past takes and I've seen, okay, this is what's kind of worked. This is what perhaps I made mistakes on. So for instance, one of the things that I learned pretty early on was not to take small samples and sort of try and deduce anything big out of them. Like I remember a couple of years ago when I was just first starting to blog, I saw Derek Pouliot through his first maybe 20, 30 games. He was doing really well. It wasn't just the numbers, it was you saw him play, and the overall sentiment of him was really positive. And then of course we saw what happened thereafter. He sort of flamed out, and last year he was a bit of a two-way liability. And so I think a lesson from that, for instance, was not to take small samples out of proportion, and so I think you live and you learn based off of what you get right and what you get wrong. But absolutely, I think there is definitely some level of, I wouldn't say concern, but you're just curious and of course a little bit nervous to see how the reaction will be to your takes, but you kind of have to make them. Right. I think that's the biggest thing. I just try and be as honest as I can of this is my assessment. And I think the biggest thing is you never want to claim to know something for certain. And I think that's one of the things that I try and do, even as I do make bold statements.
Now let's jump to some on-ice stuff and talk about some of these bold statements that you're making. Let's start with looking at where the Canucks are right now. The season's had a little bit of everything. They went on a 3-game losing streak. The sky was falling. Everyone was calling for Travis Green and Jim Benning's head. And now they're on a 5-game winning streak. How would you rate the team right now? What were the expectations coming into the year, and how do you how do you look at them right now?
I think they've certainly outperformed expectations to this point in the season. I think I gave them 1-3 playoff odds going into the season. My belief going into the year was this is a team that is absolutely going to take a step forward, and my thought was depending on injuries and so all of these factors that are that are out of your control, such as shooting luck and the list goes on and on. The strength of your opposition, how opposing teams get hit. They'll have a shot to make the playoffs, but I think I think to that extent they've definitely climbed and achieved and been better than I thought. To this point, they're of course leaped into third in the division. Their underlying performance has improved year over year. This is a team that now has at least a competent bottom six. I think that was one of the areas where I looked at the team last year and they had the worst bottom six in the NHL last year as far as goal differential. They've had an improved back end. Like that blue line has gone from being arguably one of the worst in the league to maybe slightly below average, which is a massive jump. Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes, Brock Besser have all been phenomenal. JT Miller has exceeded all expectations. So I think on the whole, you have a team right now where, if you ask me right now, whether I think they're going to make the playoffs or not, and I sort of answered it back in October at the end after seeing how the first month of the season unfolded, I'd say yes, which is probably something that I would have been maybe a little bit less, more hesitant to put my bets on in September. So that's definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like every game for the last month and a half has been considered a must-win game, by fans, by media, by anyone you talk to. And we all knew that November was going to be tough with that road trip. And there were some struggles there, a bit of a slump in November and into early December, which felt probably a lot bigger to Canucks fans and media than it ended up being. They got out of that slump, but would it be an exaggeration to say that them getting out of that slump the way they did and then turning it around into a 5-game winning streak, was that a turning point in the season in your mind?
I'm not sure if I'd necessarily call it a turning point quite yet, just because the season is so long and it has its ebbs and flows. And I think you see every team go through these highs and lows throughout the course of the season. But I do think it was really important for the Canucks to capitalize on this homestand. I think it would have been a big problem if the losing skid had continued, like if they had, say, dropped 3 or 4 of their 5-game homestand. But I think even if they had gone, let's say, 3-2, they would have been in a relatively fine position in the bigger picture. So I think I'm not certain that I'd call it necessarily a turning point, but it's been really important. And I think when you look at what's happened in the rest of the Western Conference, it looks like it's in shambles, if I'm being quite honest. San Jose has completely fallen out of the picture.
And it's so great to watch.
Yeah. And Edmonton has dropped 11 of their past 15 last I checked. They're teetering on the edge of a collapse. And Arizona lost Darcy Kemper, who's arguably been their MVP. So they've dropped 3 in a row. They've gone 4-6. They're a team that is only marginally. I'd actually have to double check if they're still ahead of the Canucks after the win Vancouver just had, but they're not as far off as they seemed perhaps a week or two ago. Winnipeg, who holds down the first wildcard spot, has lost 3 straight in 7 of their last 11 games. Minnesota, who's also in contention for wildcard spot, just recently lost Jason Zucker and Joel Eriksson-Ek to injury. I mean, you look at Nashville, another potential wildcard team. They've looked fragile all year with both Pekka Rinne and UC Saros carrying save percentages below 900. So I look at the rest of the competition, and I'm not sure that the Canucks would have needed a 5-game win streak per se to get back on track. But the fact that they have done that really solidifies their standing as one of the potential wildcard teams, because I just don't see a lot of teams that pose a serious threat from the outside looking in now.
You know, it's interesting. The Canucks, with that win against Calgary last night, some friends of mine were in Calgary were saying the Flames were going to completely beat up on the Canucks in that game yesterday, and we saw what happened. And now it's funny that the Canucks have gone on this streak, but yeah, we were not far away from the sky falling. And the biggest thing for the Canucks has it been goaltending? Has it been the consistency of the top two lines? Has it been better defensive play? We're also still seeing that the Canucks are struggling on the road. Will they need to have a .500 record on the road in order to make the playoffs?
I think if you're talking about this stretch, absolutely, goaltending has been the backbone of the team's success. In fact, if you look at their even strength performance since November 1st, they've been in the bottom half of the league as far as their ability to control shot attempts and scoring chances. And in particular, throughout the last week or 2 weeks, I think it was Thomas Drance who wrote, they've been the second most permissive defense in the NHL as far as the rate at which they're allowing scoring chances. So really, their 5-on-5 form has really dipped. But what's saving them is Jacob Markstrom, who was phenomenal through all of December, and then Thatcher Demko, of course. I think the Calgary game was a much better even strength performance, but he was solid yet again. So I think what's happening right now is, if you look through the last month or 2 months, Vancouver's team save percentage is among the best in the NHL. So I think between Markstrom and Demko, that's been the backbone of the team's success. And then beyond that, it's been special teams. Vancouver scored the most power play goals of any team in the NHL, and you combine that with the ability of the Elias Pettersson line to take over and consistently be a threat. I think those are the three keys: goaltending, special teams, and the Lotto line.
Yeah, that's certainly something that nobody can argue with. And I saw an interesting stat today on Twitter about the Canucks power play and how there's 11 different goal scorers, I think, that are not the top unit. And there's only 14 goals scored from Ottawa's power play all season long, which is crazy to think because, at the start of the year, it seemed like they were struggling, and, Quinn Hughes comes on and they haven't looked back, and yet at times the eye test tells me that I'm frustrated and they're not moving the puck well, and they're not gonna be as effective as they were, but the numbers don't lie, and it's actually mind-boggling how good their power play has been, and you certainly think that they'll need to continue to do that to make the playoffs. But when we're talking about the eye test and the numbers matching up, something you mentioned there about the Canucks having a permissive defense, and it's something related to that I've been hearing for a while now from Kevin Woodley, is that the high quality chances the Canucks are giving up is worse than last year, and the goaltenders have had to really kind of bail them out. And I'm just wondering, in your mind, if you think that can last for this team, if that's the way they're going to get into the playoffs, and or if there is another way that this team can play to get in.
Well, I think there are two things to consider. I think, for one, if the Canucks were in the Eastern Conference, this would be a much, much bigger concern, just because the East is way more competitive. There are way more teams in the hunt. So I think that's one of those things where the bar to be a playoff caliber team seems a lot lower in the Western Conference. And having said that, I do think at some point, like, you look at the second power play unit, which has been so instrumental in providing that secondary scoring, they've been clicking at an unsustainably high shooting percentage. I think it was something to the tune of some ridiculous shooting percentage, above 33% or something, over the last maybe month or so. So that's something where their power play, as far as their second unit at least, is going to come back down to earth. And so their even strength form is going to need to improve. This win streak isn't like it was in October, where the Canucks were dominating at 5-on-5, and even through early November, their play has legitimately slipped. Now, I don't think because of just how weak the conference is that they'll need to be considerably better and get back to how they played in the first 6 weeks of the season, but there does need to be some level of improvement in how they're controlling play at 5-on-5, specifically on the defensive side of things if they do want to make the playoffs.
So last week we did a mid-season check-in show, called it our holiday special, where we rated every Canucks player this season either naughty or nice. So we'll put the same question to you, but is this the team? Has this team exceeded expectations, and which players have exceeded expectations, and who hasn't met them for you this year?
I'd say I think if you're working from top to bottom, Elias Pettersson has absolutely exceeded the high expectations, and not just because of the point production, because we expected that, but just because of his evolution as a two-way force. You're seeing him in a position, particularly with the help of JT Miller, where that line is just dominating teams at even strength. They're out-shooting, out-chancing. Just the margin at which Pettersson has improved at 5-on-5 and defensively, it speaks volumes to as far as the progression of his game, and that's been a huge reason why the Canucks have been able to sustain their success. Because right now, what's happening is you have the Pettersson line, which is holding their head above the water at 5-on-5, consistently scoring, being the difference makers, and it seems as if the other three lines are struggling to keep their head. And they're sort of just trying to tread water, and a big reason why they have continued winning in spite of the bottom three lines not really pitching in as consistently is because of Pettersson and how he's really led the charge. After that, I'd say Brock Besser has met expectations. I think the point production is really gaudy, and I think I've been a little bit surprised with the amount of, I wouldn't call it criticism, but maybe the lack of appreciation for what he's brought to the table. And having said that, I do think when you watch him play, that he hasn't been, like, I still think there's more to give there from Besser's standpoint. I think JT Miller, 36 points in 40 games, second on the team in goals, absolutely exceeded expectations. I think Bo Horvat, despite the point totals, despite having 30 points in 40 games, has perhaps not met expectations. And I do wonder if it's fatigue or perhaps injury related, because there was, of course, that November 14th game, I want to say, where he left morning skate mysteriously, followed by medical personnel, and he's continued playing and logging huge minutes because his line hasn't been. He used to be able to last year carry it all on his own, and he's had Tanner Pearson by his side, who has also exceeded expectations, but defensively, that line has leaked a lot against, as far as scoring chances, high danger shots, goals against. It has not been a pretty picture for the Canucks. Whenever Bo Horvat's on the ice, their goal differential hasn't been as good as it was last year. Quinn Hughes obviously exceeded expectations. I think he's been a lot better defensively than people would have imagined. Jake Virtanen exceeded expectations given how well he's played. I think if you continue going down the list, and I mean, more or less after that, it's guys who are probably meeting expectations. And as far as, I don't know, like,
one guy I wanted to kind of, sorry to interrupt you there, but one guy I wanted to point out was Tyler Myers, and we had a good debate about him, and we had a good debate about Bo Horvat last week too, because, you know, as much as you want to praise the guy for, you know, putting the C on his chest, taking sort of the team on his shoulders, even though, you know, there's other players that have clearly done that. But you know, we do expect more out of Bo Horvat, especially last season, and it was a good debate, and it's interesting to hear your take about that as well. It's kind of right in the middle, but probably not good enough. And certainly when you look at the numbers, like you said, there's some gaudy negative numbers there for Horvat. But Tyler Myers was a big acquisition in the offseason, and certainly has made their defense better. I think we agreed on last week, but you know, for me, one thing is that at that price tag, at this point in his career, I still see too many mistakes in his own end, too many mistakes with the puck. And he had a good game last game, and I certainly credit him. But is there more from Tyler Myers? Do you think the Canucks should be getting more out of him than they are this season?
I don't think so. I think Myers has met expectations. I think he's more or less what he was billed as when the Canucks signed him, which is a number 4 defenseman. And the unfortunate part is just I don't think he's ever going to live up to his contract. He's paid with the $6 million as a top pairing guy, and that's just not Tyler Myers. And I think when you break down his play, you kind of at some point, I think, especially as we move forward, it's going to be important that we kind of separate Myers' play from his contract, because
that's kind of a theme with this team, hey?
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because he has, as you mentioned, been a legitimate upgrade. I think if you look at the point totals, 13 points in 40 games, I think he has more to give in that department. But in having said that, I think he's just been the victim of extremely poor shooting luck. And we saw some of that reverse against Calgary, where he had some bounces go in his favor for sure. But that's one of those things where I'm looking at the shots and the scoring chances that he's helping to produce, and his underlying profile suggests that he's bringing it offensively. It's just a matter of getting the bounces. But he's just someone who, when you throw him up further in the lineup, when he's asked to play top competition, on the first pairing especially, when you overplay him, that's when you expose his faults. And the issue you run into is when Tyler Myers makes his mistakes, they tend to be big ones. So I think they stand out more in that sense. But more or less, all things considered, I think he's been a fine number 4 defenseman. I certainly don't have any qualms with or problems with his play relative to what we've seen from him throughout his career. But it's just an unfortunate situation where he's not going to be someone who lives up to his contract.
Yeah, and on that right side of the D, I mean, you've got Myers, you've got Stetcher, and who else do you have there right now? Chris Tanev, right? So with Tanev and Stetcher, being free agents, there's potentially a lot of change on the right side, but one guy you can't really move is Myers. So, maybe it's not something we talk about today because we're kind of looking at the team now and as they kind of make a push for the playoffs here, but maybe we get you back on near the end of the season or in the off season to talk about what the Canucks might do with that right side, especially with Brogan Rafferty around the corner and with Tanev sort of at the tail end of his career. I wonder what that right side looks like in a couple of years, and same with the left side, right? Edler signed for another year, and some blue chip prospects potentially coming up on the left side. But we'll save that for another day and stick to this season. We've got a couple more questions for you, and I know you've been quite generous with your time, so we won't keep you much longer. But let's look ahead here with the rest of the season ahead of us. We're pretty much halfway. What intrigues you most about this Canucks team as we look at the second half and hopefully a playoff push late in the season?
I'm not sure if there's anything in particular that's. I think more than anything, it's what intrigues me with the team is a lot of the bigger picture stuff.
Yeah.
I think on ice, it's just a matter of whether they can sustain their level of play and make the playoffs. But I think there are bigger question marks as far as what they're going to do, especially at the trade deadline. I'm going to be really curious to see the kind of approach they take there, because Jim Benning has been vocal. He wants to add some top 6 help. He's, of course, got an interesting dilemma between the pipes with Jacob Markstrom, a pending unrestricted free agent. And if they do extend him, then Thatcher Demko is a potential trade chip. They've got, obviously, a number of expiring contracts elsewhere on the roster. You have Chris Tanev, who's pending UFA, Troy Stetcher's a pending RFA, and of course there's a whole cap crunch that they're also in heading into next season. So there are just a lot of moving parts, a lot of questions to be answered with regards to the bigger picture. So I think once you go beyond the question of will they make the playoffs, I'm really intrigued to see their approach. First at the trade deadline, and then, of course, going into the offseason, because I do think these are going to be very critical decisions coming up.
The Canucks the Canucks should not be buyers of the trade deadline, right? They're obviously 3 or 4 years away from being a cup contending team. Like, how does Jim Benning think that adding a top six forward to make a push into the playoffs for maybe a round or two, really
which might be a rental even, right?
What benefit is that?
Yeah, and that's a question a lot of people ask, and it's a fair one to ponder about. I think from Benning's perspective, it's clear. I think it's unfortunate when GMs are put in a position where their jobs are potentially on the line, and that's not to say that Benning is on the hot seat, especially with the way the team has been performing as of late. But the one message that was constant, even when Benning was extended in the summer, was that the playoffs are the clear expectation for this season, and if they don't make it, or at least if they're not, or at least if they're not close, then there could be potential problems. And we've seen a precedent with the Aquilini group where they're not afraid to fire coaches, GMs. I mean, you look at John Tortorella, fired 1 year into his 5-year deal. So you can understand why, from Jim Benning's perspective, he's perhaps in a position where he's fixated on short-term success. And I think if you look at the bigger picture and you look at even the path of this rebuild, retool, whatever you want to call it, the organization hasn't made moves with the long-term future in mind. Like, they never flipped Tanev 2 years ago. They've just never acquired picks. They've never made rebuilding team type moves. So maybe it's just an organizational philosophy, even from the ownership, where they seem to really care about trying to fast track and accelerate this project and be a playoff team as soon as possible. And that's, of course, a proposition where you're walking on a tight line there. You don't want to potentially mortgage the future just to acquire short-term immediate help, and certainly they're going to have to be very careful.
Yeah, definitely. And to Jim Benning's credit, and I did throw out the term rental player, but he has been saying that he doesn't want a rental player. He wants to add, guys that can be a part of the future. But we'll see when the trade deadline comes. And like you talk about, he's thinking potentially of his future. Things might change there. I do remember quite vividly, and I could be making it up, but it was so vivid to me that I think it was true, is that in Mike Gillis's first press conference, he said he is not going to give out no trade clauses in his contracts, and then he ended up with a ton of them. So, the words are worth the paper that they're written on, right? Sometimes. So we'll see. I'll leave you with this one then. I don't know. A lot of people are talking about what it'll take to make the playoffs in terms of whether it's the division that's the best bet or the wild card for the Canucks. Do you have any sense of sort of what number of points it might take in either case to make the playoffs for the Canucks, or are those numbers you haven't crunched just yet?
I haven't, but I imagine it would be pretty similar to last year, where the bar was really low, and I think either path is feasible. I mentioned teams like Minnesota and Nashville. Like, the Central's been a lot weaker than people imagined between Winnipeg and Nashville. Chicago has never really found itself back on its track. So either the wild card or the division both look ripe for the taking right now.
All right, well, we're going to have to wait and see. That it's going to be a fun run if the Canucks can stay healthy and, like you said, continue playing the way they have been playing, and we'll see what happens around them. But this has been a great pleasure for me, and I'm sure for Zam.
For sure, yeah.
You've definitely showed why you are where you are. You've been a true professional, and have had some great insight. And I thank you again for taking some time with us today, and wish you all the best in the future. Hopefully you can continue doing what you're doing for a very long time, because we're all enjoying it.
Thanks, guys.
Good luck, man.
That was Harman Dayal of The Athletic, and that was impressive.
Wow. Yeah.
I told him at the end, but that was impressive.
Yeah, like 19 years old. I remember what I was doing at 19.
I'm surprised you remember, because what you're doing at 19 probably means you shouldn't remember.
Yeah, well, no, I wasn't doing that many bad things, but like at the same time, I wasn't focused on hosting a podcast or like
right.
Podcasting wasn't necessarily
let alone going to Canucks practice every day and going on the road and writing articles. And we talked about it during the interview, some articles that might, ruffle some feathers among Canucks Twitter. And I made the joke about Canucks Twitter, but might ruffle some feathers in the Canucks dressing room and management and in media. And so, this guy is clearly a pro and is really good at what he does. And I can't imagine him not doing this for a long time if he wants to, and certainly if he wants to change course down the line, that's his choice. But really good at what he does, and he's a must read for me every time he publishes something. And I haven't had that in a while. And in my mind, you can certainly see Botchford's influence on what he does and how he does it, for sure. He's maybe not as loud and boisterous, but certainly the professionalism and how he goes about his business, for sure.
The loudness and boisterous may come with time. He's still 19.
And it may not.
And he may or may not, but you can definitely see that he's to have that confidence at 19, and just obviously having a mentor like Jason Botchford and
and others, I'm sure, like Thomas Drance
has
is showing him the ropes now. Drance has been on both sides of the media, and Jeff Patterson has shown that he's supporting him as well. And there's a lot of good people in the Vancouver media, so I'm sure he's getting a ton of support, and that's going to help him grow sort of exponentially, right? And
people that I've run into in the Vancouver media and have worked with have generally been very good to me, and they're very supportive of young reporters, young journalists coming up. Sometimes it is hard to break through, but he got himself a good mentor that has helped open some doors for him, and obviously he's had to kick those doors down and show show his own skill as well.
Yeah, and after listening to him, better him than us, because I'm not sure I could do the job he's doing the way he's doing it. So I'm glad to have talked to him, and hopefully we can talk to him again.
Oh, look forward to it, and look forward to learning more about the analytics side of it.
Yeah. All right, thanks for listening. See you later.